Good evening. This is Troy Fullerton coming at you tonight with another edition of The Truth on the Table. Tonight, I'd like to share an analogy with you that I think sheds a lot of light on the subject of illegal immigration, particularly illegal immigration from Mexico into the United States. I'd like for you to imagine for a moment that you live in a rather nice middle-class neighborhood. As responsible parents, you work for a living, you try hard to provide a decent home for your family, as do most of the people on your street, but you have neighbors to the south, a block to the south, who just don't share your values. They neglect their kids. While they themselves enjoy luxuries, they let their kids live in squalor and basically leave them to fend for themselves. Now, stop and think. Do you feel bad for those kids? Naturally. Would you do something to try to help them? Oh, probably. But would you feel obligated to let those kids live like one of your own children, coming and going through your home as they please, helping themselves to your family's belongings? What if, without ever being adopted legally, or without ever taking your family's name, they made it be known that they basically expected to be treated like one of your own children? Now, no matter how you felt about the kids, you wouldn't allow the integrity of your own home and the autonomy of your own family to be violated, all in the name of enabling somebody else's irresponsibility. Ultimately, these kids are somebody else's kids, and the answer would lie in demanding that their parents make changes and start providing for their own. But now I want you to take it a step further and imagine that those same neglected kids started sneaking into your house without your permission. What if they raided your refrigerator when you weren't looking? What if they slept on your sofa when you weren't at home? What if they went through your garage and used your tools and even borrowed your car without your permission? How would you feel about that? Finally, what if they even had the audacity to announce that they felt that they were entitled to do all of that, that they had a right to be in your home, since, after all, you have so much more than your share, in their opinion anyway, and besides all of that, once upon a time, your great-great-grandparents had supposedly exploited their great-great-grandparents, and so, for that reason, and that reason alone, forever and ever, amen, they're entitled to just walk straight into your house without your permission whenever they feel like it. Okay, now look, you may still feel some sympathy for these kids. I mean, after all, somebody's fed them that narrative. But realistically, you can't just have people walking uninvited through your house either. Eventually, you'd have to start taking some measures. You'd have to start locking the door, maybe even putting up a fence with a locked gate. You might even have to install a security system. And naturally, the neglected kids wouldn't like it. But it would only be reasonable for you to secure your home. That would just be common sense. But now imagine that the parents of these neglected kids started protesting that you're discriminating against their children. Imagine them complaining that you're being unneighborly and making it so that their kids, who are just going to sneak in anyway, might get hurt by your security measures. Imagine them accusing you of hating their kids and even calling your security fence deplorable and trying to publicly shame you for taking the measures you're taking. Well, you might remind them that if they took responsibility for their own family and took responsibility for their kids, well, their kids would be staying at home rather than trying to break into their neighbors' houses. And you might also remind them that as parents, they ought to be teaching their children to respect private property. But of course, you and I both know that's all going to fall on deaf ears, because the truth of the matter is, those parents want those kids breaking into your home and bringing home from your house what they're bringing. They're not about to stop them. In fact, if anything, they're going to encourage them to keep right on breaking in. All right, now if you can imagine anything from that long-winded analogy, then I'm sure you can imagine, you've got an excellent idea, in fact, of our current situation with illegal immigration into Mexico. Illegal immigration from Mexico into the United States. Rather than taking common sense measures to help their own people, we've got between 11 and 12 million Mexicans living right now in the United States with the blessing and the encouragement of the Mexican government. Just like an unruly teenager who has children out of wedlock and then expects other people to foot the bill for their irresponsibility, Mexico expects us to take responsibility for their own citizens. Well, you know what? I think it's time for Mexico to grow up. I think it's time for them to start taking responsibility for their own people for a change. It's not our fault that the Mexican government won't establish a reasonable minimum wage so its people can make a decent living without being exploited. Also, their refusal to crack down on the graft and corruption of their political leaders and their refusal to curtail drug cartels and their judicial environment that is governed by bribes rather than by laws, that's not our problem either. We didn't do that. And while I think it's unconscionable for greedy foreign industrialists to set up operations in Mexico just so that they can plunder and pollute while paying slave wages to the Mexican people, I've got a question for you. Who, pray tell, is letting them do it? Who's minding the store? Mexico's problems are the result of Mexico's bad decisions, and it's not our responsibility to fix that. The fact that so many people want out of Mexico is a national disgrace to Mexico, not to the United States. It has rightly earned them the scorn of the world community by pointing out the unwillingness of the Mexican government to take care of its own citizens. And Mexico is well able to deal with its own problems. The natural and economic resources in Mexico have been there all along, which is what made them so attractive to the foreign capitalists in the first place. But along with those resources, there has been this insidious attitude that the haves should keep their exalted position and their money, while the have-nots should be taken care of by someone else. Now, in our modern times, that attitude is translated into, just let the Americans take care of them. Well, it may be a novel concept, but how about if we go ahead and put up our fence and let the Mexicans take care of Mexicans for a change? Sounds almost normal, doesn't it? Now, I need to make it clear here that I don't blame Mexico's poor people who are just trying to make a living for trying to come here. I'm sure that if I were in their situation, I'd do whatever I had to take care of my own family. I've personally known many illegal aliens, had good friends who were illegal aliens, and I'm quite aware of the realities of their situation. I'm not at all insensitive to their plight. And frankly, I don't blame them for their choices. And I really don't blame them for not being sympathetic to our need to close our borders and enforce our immigration laws. But this is a country here. And it practically floors me that the Mexican government, the very entity that is supposed to be helping these people, would have the audacity to register one word of protest about our border security measures. After all, do they let people from Central America sneak into their country? What happens if they try to and get caught? For that matter, what would happen if I, as an American citizen, sneaked into Mexico, worked illegally, bought property, and tried to live as though I belonged there? Think they'd put up with that? Think again. They'd throw me out of there in a New York minute. And they'd be right in doing so. Now, in saying these things, I want to make it clear, I'm not advocating mass deportations, and I'm not being anti-Hispanic in the least. As a Spanish-speaking man who has been involved in Hispanic ministry over the years, I recognize that the roots of Hispanic culture here in the United States run deep, and I'm fine with that reality. I'd be saying these same things if we had Canadians sneaking in. It's not a racial issue at all. And I'm not against immigration either. But I'm totally against leaving our borders open and practically encouraging illegal immigration. If, after closing our borders, securing our borders, and no longer tolerating any illegal entry of any kind, We decide to make it easier for people to come here legally. Well, that's fine, but you know what? This is our home, our nation, and it's time for us to start locking the door